So I've shared this with you a dozen times over the last year. I have a Disney problem. I'm not really ashamed of it either. And it's not just about going to Disney World, Disneyland, and all the places. I actually love the movies, like all of them. But my favorite one ever, like the number one Disney movie of all time, is without question Peter Pan. It's the best one. You know why? Because I'm a kid. I'm very immature, and the idea of not having to grow up really appeals to me. Plus, there's pirates and all of the cool stuff that happens in that movie. That's the best possible scenario. So I've always loved Peter Pan, but there is one problem with that movie. It really messed up my understanding of how shadows work. If you remember, at the beginning of the movie, Peter Pan meets Wendy in her bedroom, which is kind of weird that he snuck into her bedroom. But anyway, the shadow is flying all over the place, and Peter Pan's trying to catch it. Eventually he does, and Wendy has to sew it back onto the bottom of his feet. And when you're a child, you're like, I didn't know it could come off like that. And you sit there and you try and pull that thing off, but then you're a little afraid like somebody's gonna have to sew my foot back to a shadow. So it's this whole thing where you start to believe that shadows have a life of their own, that they can act apart from you. And when you're a kid, you see that in all kinds of ways. Like when you're in bed and you're trying to fall asleep and the tree outside casts a shadow on the wall in your bedroom, you're pretty sure that's a monster coming to get you. It's not a tree, it's something else, and it's alive and it's scary, and we hide under the covers, right? I mean, that's the nature of all shadows. They get distorted. They don't always look exactly like the thing that they are. And because of that, we can view them detached from the thing that they come from. But the reality of all shadows is they're a result of something else. They're not the root. They're not the beginning. I'm the beginning. You're the beginning. The tree's the beginning. The things are the beginning, right? And so we have to spend some time after we see Peter Pan as little children getting reacquainted with how these things actually work. And just like a shadow can be scary and unruly, so can your family, right? Some of us grew up in a place that when we look back, it terrifies us. We have no control over what that is doing. We don't seem to understand all the time that it comes from somewhere. In a lot of ways, our legacy and our memory that is our family that we engage with all the time, every day, whether it's in person or just emotionally, has taken on a life of its own. It's become kind of its own thing. And we spend a great deal of time trying to figure that out. For instance, some of us feel like we're stuck in the shadow of our family. Our last name is not wind in the sails, it's a hurdle that we have to overcome. For some of us, it's this weight that we carry around, and we just hope people don't ask us what our last name is. We're stuck in it. We're doomed to repeat the history that we're coming on the heels of. It's the things that tell us, like, well, we don't go to college because our family doesn't go to college. We don't move away from town because our family has never moved away from town. We don't go on adventures because we are not adventure people. And that can get darker and deeper the more you go into the rabbit hole, right? But a lot of us feel like this shadow has overwhelmed us, enveloped us, and we can't get outside of it and out into the light for ourselves. And because of that, some of us spend a whole lot of time running from the shadow. It's become this scary monster that's out to get us. And we're trying to rewrite the narrative. We're trying to change the story. We're trying to do it different. But somehow it keeps catching up. That's the hard part about shadows, is they really don't detach. And it is going to follow us, and it is going to be a part of our life, no matter how hard we try. And we've spent so much time running and running and running. And I know it's kind of cliche, because you think like anytime anybody goes and sits in a counselor's office or psychologist's office, they're going to tell you got mommy and daddy issues. You know why they all say that? Because you do. And so do I. We've spent a lot of our life running from our parents, trying to be better, trying to do different. The better part, it's almost like we're trying to get bigger than them. Because if we could cast a bigger shadow, a better shadow, a more impressive one that would envelop or engulf their shadow, then we're in control and it's about us and not about them, and we're wearing ourselves out. We're wearing ourselves out trying to make more money, have a bigger, better house, be more successful, know more people, be a different, better parent. We get to the end of the week, we're exhausted, and we think it's because of our job or because of the chores that we have at home, but at the end, it's this deeper emotional thing that we've been trying to outgrow or outrun all week long. Here's the thing about shadows. I took maybe like one semester of physics, so I don't pretend to be real knowledgeable in this, but I played around with a flashlight a lot this week to get a feel for how shadows work. And they're really dependent on three very specific variables. You need light, you need an object, and then you need to position that object in a certain way. If you don't have light, you're not going to have shadows. And if you don't have something that's casting a shadow, you're not going to have a shadow. And if you don't position that thing in such a way with relation to the light, it's not going to work. And what's cool is if you move any of those, the result will change. The shadow will change. Once you become aware of those things and you get some control and some definition to those things, you can move them around. And I'm convinced that's true with your family too. There's really three distinct variables in your family that I think once we get a handle on, you can change the shadow your family casts on your life. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to show you how this looks, so I came up with a little diagram. We have a light source in the sun, and we've gotten a lot of sun around here lately, so you've seen this play out. You have a tree, and then you have positions A or B. If you're standing in position A, odds are there's not going to be a lot of shadow because the sun is beating directly on this tree, so you're not going to see it. But if you moved over to the other side of the tree, all of a sudden you would be in the shadow of the tree, only we don't call it a shadow, we call it shade. So is it possible that a shadow could become something good? Because on a hot day, I'm so grateful that that thing is casting a shadow in the way that it is. What's so frustrating sometimes, though, is you could get into position B or A, and then your light source is going to change. The sun's going to move, as it always does, which means the shadow is going to move and change. So these things are always in play. This is the same thing that's true for you in your life. There's a few things that are always at play, and they're variables that can move around and be manipulated. Things like your past. There's also your present, though. You're the object today. And then there's also the future. And what's the relationship between the past and the present, and how does that play into the future? Does it play into it at all? So just in case you need a nap this morning, because last night was really fun, I'm going to give you the bottom line for the whole day so you can go to sleep. I'm going to encourage you today to listen to the past, locate to the present, I'll explain that in a minute, and learn the future. If you do those first two things, you have the ability to predict what will happen next. In some ways, you have the ability to control what will happen next. So I got to catch you up on the first royal family of Israel. And if you haven't been with us the last few weeks, it would be worth going online. You can go to our YouTube page or our website and watch the previous talks. Because the royal family of Israel is a hot mess. Always. It just seems to never go right. These guys never get it on the dot. I mean, it's just always backwards and upside down. And the first we met was Saul, who was really chosen by the people but not God. And then we met David, who was the one that God wanted to be the king of Israel. And he had several children, almost 21 of them to be exact, and one of them was named Solomon, and Solomon became king, and he started off pretty good, got it wrong in the end. And then Solomon has a son named Rehoboam. It's probably not on your list to name your baby, right? But Rehoboam's a really interesting character. David ruled for 40 years. Solomon ruled for 40 years. Rehoboam only rules for 17. But in year one, in fact, in day one, he has to deal with the shadow of his family. Grandpa Grandpa Dave was the man after God's own heart. He was the guy that walked out into the middle of the battlefield and killed a giant with a stone. He was the one that had established Israel. I mean, talk about a reputation to hold up. Talk about a shadow that he has to live in. And then his dad, Solomon, he starts his rule off really great. He asks God for wisdom. God says, you'll be the wisest man to ever live. I mean, that is some kind of title. And Solomon's the guy that builds the temple and he builds the palace, and there's a lot of really great things happening in Israel. Some kind of shadow. The problem with Solomon, I mentioned, is that he doesn't get it right at the end. Remember, he's the guy with the 700 wives, 300 concubines. And they turn him to other gods, and he starts worshiping. Like, one of the gods he starts worshiping requires that you sacrifice your children. It got really messy really fast. And some of the things that Solomon did made it that the inheritance Rehoboam is getting is super messy. And I think some of us might really identify with him because the inheritance you've received, family-wise, is real messy. So Solomon hands Rehoboam a legacy of dominance. This is the shadow that Rehoboam lives in. And it's dominance because we hear that Solomon built the temple and he built the palace, and we think that's really great. What we don't realize all the time is that those structures did not just come into existence out of thin air. They had to be built. And so Solomon actually forced his own people into the labor force to build these things. He really enslaved his own folks. You have to go work on the palace. You have to go work on the temple. And it was brutal, brutal work. If you've ever seen pictures of these structures, or at least diagrams of these structures, they did not have cranes and bulldozers and all that stuff like we have. How they built these things is still beyond me. But it meant that every day was brutal for the people that called Solomon king. Is Rehoboam going to continue that legacy or not? On top of it, he gives him this deflated people. They're so beat up from the labor, but also you got to pay for these materials. And how does a government pay for the materials to build its infrastructure? Taxes. So Solomon raised taxes to such a high level that most people were dirt poor. They're working all day, bringing home pennies, nothing to show for it. And so it's not real fun to be an Israelite at this point in history. I just imagine Rehoboam being like, thanks a lot, Dad. Like, this is great. What am I going to do with all of this? And on top of it, Rehoboam's family was the family that really initiated some division in the kingdom. And part of that came from originally, it was considered the capital of Israel was a city called Shechem. And that was in the northern part of the kingdom. And it was Rehoboam's family that had moved it down to Jerusalem, which is in the southern end. The problem is that up in the northern end of Israel, 10 of the 12 tribes lived, that's a lot of people, by the way. And then the big one down in the south was Judah. So at some point, if you're ever reading scripture and you're like, why do we talk about Israel and Judah? It's because eventually the kingdom divides. And Rehoboam is the wedge, by the way, that makes the division. But people are uneasy. You've suddenly made one end of the country more important than the other end of the country, and you broke tradition, and this is a sentimental place, and how can you do this? Imagine the unrest. Probably not hard living in 2024, an election year, right? Like, there's a lot of this kind of thing happening for us. And so Rehoboam does something that is pretty wise in my mind. He decides that he's going to hold his coronation ceremony up in Shechem, up in the original city, which, by the way, was known for where you go to make a covenant or renew a covenant. And so he gathers people up there to kind of initiate his rule as king. And his primary focus is to try to bring unity to a divided kingdom. And so he decides he's going to ask the people, what would it take? What needs to be done in order for our kingdom to come back together? You could say it this way: what would it take for our family to come back together? This is what they say in 1 Kings. Your father was a hard master, they said. And for a kid that grew up in church, I'm like, they can't be talking about Solomon. But the more you read about Solomon, the more this doesn't maybe surprise you. He was a harsh king. Lighten the harsh labor demands and heavy taxes that your father imposed on us. Then we'll be your loyal subjects. Rehoboam replied, give me 3 days to think this over. And I'm like, what do you have to think about, bro? They just told you the recipe for success. You lighten the taxes, you stop forcing us to do all this labor. We're here for you, man. We'll be your loyal subjects. We'll bring Israel back together. It'll be all good. You don't need a diagram, Rehoboam. You don't, they just told you. If you'll listen to us, this is what will happen next. The problem is Rehoboam is not wrestling with the request of the people. He's wrestling with the demand of his daddy. He's wrestling with the family name and the heavy, heavy weight of he who wears the crown that used to sit on his dad's head, on his grandpa's head. So for him, it's not, do I want to make the people happy or do I want to make them angry? It's, do I want to have loyalty or do I want to continue to live lavishly? Because not only was Solomon super wise, he was super rich. And he dressed to the nines. In fact, a few centuries later, Jesus would talk about how precious you are, and that you are more precious than the lilies of the field, who on their worst day are dressed better than Solomon, he says. Because Solomon was the guy. Fashion, money, influence, power, all of that. So Rehoboam, listening to the people, is like, well, I kind of wanted to be like my dad. I kind of wanted to do better than my dad. And again, I know you and I, all day, every day, we're not saying things like that out loud, but it's under the surface. There's something wired into each of us that want to exceed where our parents got. Whether that's financially, possession-wise, or just how we parent, how we make friends, how we have relationships. All of these kinds of things factor in, somehow connected to the past. So Rehoboam asks for 3 days to think about it, and he decides he's going to do another wise thing, and he's going to consult some of his dad's advisors because he doesn't know who else to turn to. How am I going to process through this? And this is what they say. Then King Rehoboam addressed or discussed the matter with the older men who had counseled his father Solomon. And this is what they said. Or he asked, what's your advice? How should I answer these people? And this is how they replied to him. If you are willing to be a servant to these people today and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your loyal subjects. It's kind of weird. Not what you'd expect. The guys that were the king's advisors are now telling the king's son, don't do it like your dad. We were there, by the way. We were there when he imposed the taxes. We were there when he made people go to work. We were there, yes, when all the cool things were a result of some of those things, but listen to us. We're speaking from experience. This is not going to take you in a good direction if you don't listen to them. There's been unrest brewing for a long time. We knew it when we told your dad, because at some point I'm guessing they probably told Solomon to do the things that they were doing. And now they've learned from their experience, this is not going to benefit the kingdom. It's not going to benefit us. And this is where I say we have to listen to the past. Were these good guys? I don't know. They were at least in on some of those hard decisions. And Solomon's dead. He's not there for Rehoboam to sit down and consult directly. But he should have listened. He doesn't, by the way. He should have, though. Because they were telling him the future. They were telling him, listen, this is what's going to happen. if you don't do it different. And I know that for a lot of us, mom and dad may not be around because either they've passed on or we don't have a relationship with them. And so listening to the past feels tricky, but you can listen to the past without a direct conversation. Learn from the things that were done or not done, the mistakes that were made, the good things that came from it, if there were. I think sometimes we're in this business of like, I want to forge my own path. I want to do my own thing. And we ignore or pretend like this never happened, but we shouldn't. There's a reason the old adage is an old adage of those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I mean, think about this. If you sat down with your grandpa, if you could, or your grandma, or mom or dad, or anybody that's been around for a while, and you started to listen to their story, I'm betting there would be things that would come from that where you go, well, that sounds familiar. That happened in the 40s too? Yep. Oh, that happened in the 70s when you were a kid? Yeah. I mean, I have it with my own kids. And when I tell them about some of the things that I had to deal with when I was in middle school or high school, they look at me crazy like, I can't believe that was a thing back then. Yeah, it was, way back in the 1900s. I mean, it was crazy. We didn't even have the internet yet. Some of these themes just have a way of cycling through society. So what if we listen to the past and we're able to glean some wisdom from it so that we could do this different? I mean, it was Rehoboam's own dad, Solomon, who wrote about this very principle in the book of Proverbs. This is what he said: walk with the wise and become wise. Associate with fools and get in trouble. Facts, right? I mean, if you just listen to dad, I mean, here he's sitting, by the way, with wise people, because wisdom, it's knowledge applied. It's not knowing a bunch of stuff. That's being smart. And I know a lot of smart people that are not very wise, right? Like we call this the difference between book smarts and street smarts. To me, street smarts is our way of saying wisdom. You know how to apply the knowledge you have in your everyday. And he's got people in his corner, these advisors from his dad, who know how this is going to go. They have that knowledge, and they now know how to apply it. The problem is, Rehoboam decides to listen to fools and gets in trouble because he couldn't bear the idea of choosing service over supremacy. The shadow of his dad had cast in such a way that he believed, I need to be powerful, I need to be a heavy-handed ruler, I need to drive people for the greatness of Israel and the greatness of my name. Instead of deciding to serve others. And you and I, by the way, are the result, the fact that you are sitting here means you are the result of a king who decided to serve. If only Rehoboam had listened. But Rehoboam rejected the advice of the older men and instead asked the opinion of the young men who he had grown up with. Super smart idea. This is what you should tell those complainers who want a lighter burden. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. I'm going to pause. Because that's a really weird saying. And it's translated in a very PG way. What these guys are saying is you should tell everybody that your little finger is bigger than your dad's. I'm not kidding. That's actually in the Bible. I've been telling you, if you think it's boring, you're reading the wrong parts. This is real. It's really important. Because what they're playing into is a son's desire to outshine his dad. Because this is what they say next. Yeah, my father laid heavy burdens on you, but I'm going to make them even heavier. My father beat you with whips, but I will beat you with scorpions. And you might be going, how are they going to do that? They're just going to chuck them at people? Or Scorpions is a kind of whip that got developed right around this time in history. And instead of just leather straps on the end of a stick, they tied shards of bone and glass and stone to the end of it, the stinger on a scorpion. It's the kind of whip that Jesus was beaten with before he was killed. And so Rehoboam decides, I'm in competition. I got to outshine my dad. And all of a sudden you realize he has totally ruled out the people. This is not a decision for the kingdom. This is not a decision for the people. This is not a decision about taxes or forced labor or any of that. This is about him and his dad. So for the next 30 seconds, if you are here and you're a woman, I'm going to invite you to tune me out for 30 seconds. I'm not saying what I'm about to say never applies to a woman, but as a guy, I know it always applies to me. Fellas, you have spent a lot of energy and a lot of time competing with a ghost. You're trying to outdo dad, do better than dad, be bigger than dad, stronger than dad, hit the ball farther than dad, run faster than dad, have more money than dad, show dad up. And you have based countless decisions not on the decision in front of you, but on who's going to get first place. You got daddy issues. So do I. For some of you women, it's maybe mom, maybe it's dad, I don't know. But we all slip into this place where the decision we're making has nothing to do with the decision. The decision Rehoboam's making has nothing to do with the decision. It's all about his dad, and his buddies know how to play into that. That's why it's so important that we locate to the present. We need to listen to the past, but not be stuck in it. We need to listen and pay attention to what's happened and learn from it, but we can't let it stay there. We have to find out where we're at today. Who is right in front of me? What is happening in this moment? Is there a connection? Yes. But we can't be so overwhelmed by that we're basing this on things that have to do with that and not this. A lot of us are running from the shadow of our parents instead of just showing up in this moment. Had Rehoboam understood that, I think he would have chosen strength over power. And is there a difference? Yes. This is important for the dads especially. You can be gentle and strong. You can be humble and strong. Power's overrated. It didn't get Rehoboam anywhere. And at the end of the day, it didn't get Solomon anywhere. Here's the people that he had ruled over for 40 years saying, please don't do it like him. Please don't focus on power and more power and, all that home improvement kind of stuff from back in the 90s. Please do it different. Be strong. And you go, well, can you be in charge and be strong? Yeah. Jesus did it. Again, king of the universe throws a towel over his arm and washes the feet of his followers. That's strength. Overcoming your natural drive, your natural instinct, that's strength. Maybe dad didn't do that well. Maybe mom didn't do that well. So choose different. Again, Rehoboam didn't. He chose power. And what's interesting to me is what happens next is nobody bends the knee to his power. They reject it. This is what we read. When all Israel realized that the king had refused to listen to them, they responded, "Down with the dynasty of David." Rehoboam's decisions are now having an impact on years gone by. We have no interest in the son of Jesse. That's David's dad. "Back to your homes, O Israel. Look out for your own house, O David." So the people of Israel returned home. And you and I just read the beginning of the divide. From this moment forward, Israel is broken. The north goes and finds a former contractor, foreman for Solomon named Jeroboam. It's interesting that their names rhyme. He becomes the king of the north. Rehoboam rules over one tribe in the south. I'm telling you, it reads like a movie. And we got to that place because Rehoboam refused to listen to the past. He made decisions based and stuck in the past instead of in this moment, the reality that he was in. Had he done either or both, he would have learned the future. And he would have learned that this could be different. And looking back, the first group of guys that he talked to, they could have told you, we'll tell you what's going to happen. The people before them that he had asked, they would tell him what happened, but he wouldn't listen. And he was so hung up with dad that he missed the prediction. He missed the ability to control what happened next, to control the shadow. Let's not do the same. At the end, he chose division over unity. He decided to live in that past, and there's a broken kingdom that results. This is why I'm trying to get my head around, and I'm hoping that you will too. We need to learn from the past, locate to the present, so we learn the future. And when we learn it, we can write it. We started this whole series with what does it look like for us to stop the book halfway and decide we're not doing it anymore and write a new story. Sometimes in order to write that new story, we still have to understand the one we've read so far. Know where we're at so we know where we're going. And here's what this might look like for you. It's certainly what it's been looking like for me lately. I've decided that I am going to get the why from the who. And what that's looked like is sitting down and asking a lot of questions and having conversations with my family, with the people that I call mom and dad and grandma and uncle and aunt and all the little branches of the trees that come off, and just listening to the story that was and figuring out how does that apply and connect to the one that is right now, so that whatever's coming next, I can go into with my eyes wide open. And I know for a lot of you, this next part is the part where you're like, no, sir, I'm not doing that. There's too much pain, there's too much abuse, there's too much, and by the way, when it comes to that end of the spectrum, some of you are the victim of abuse in your family, and I'm not encouraging you to go back to that. This is a different category. But I am going to say some of us might need counseling. And I know everybody gets weird about that. So I'm going to tell you, I have been to years of counseling. Like in my life, I've spent a lot of money on Disney, and right under that is counseling. Because I always think counseling isn't where messed up people go. Counseling is where people who want to get better go. It's the messed up people that say it's not going to be of any use to me. Sometimes we need somebody that's not even connected remotely to the rut that we're in to help us pull up out of that rut, to give us the equipment and the strategies to think through things and feel through things. So sometimes the who is not the person that you call family. It might be somebody kind of parallel to your family that's going to help you understand it better. And here's what it looks like. If you have the chance and you're willing to sit down with your family, I think we got to work on asking better questions. Questions that don't assume the answer. So instead of saying, hey, can you tell me about the time you screwed up my life? It might be about a specific instance. Like, hey, can you tell me the story of this from your perspective? Or why was that the decision when I was a kid, Mom? And let them share. And don't interrupt, just listen. Don't interpret, just listen. And as you hear the story, you might begin to understand some things that you didn't understand before. And I'm not saying it's going to make it all okay and groovy. I'm saying that you might just have some new tools to work with. One of the most eye-opening moments just this week, I had dinner at my folks' house last night, and we were talking about a church that we went to when I was a kid. And my mom said, it stopped me dead in my tracks. She said, we were in our early 40s when we started going there. I'm like, there's no way my parents were my age one time. Because I know how I feel. You know how many things I'm doing in life where I'm like, I hope this works out? I have no idea what I actually should do. I'm just doing. My parents were doing the same thing. The best they could with what they had. It changed the way I think about some things. And then I would encourage you to write down the memories that come up. And you might even ask them to write it down. By the way, there's some really great resources now on Amazon, and you could Google these, where you hand your parent a notebook, and it's like a fill-in-the-blank thing that they do. And you essentially get them to write their memoir without them knowing they're writing their memoir. And you get the history of who your parents are, or maybe your grandparents. By the way, if you are a parent of young children or teenage children, I would encourage you to start doing this for them. Because you might be the parent of the century, but I promise you one day they're going to sit in a counselor's office and talk about how you messed them up. So give them the context. Give them the context. The story that you grew up in. And then the hardest part of this is that you are at some point going to have to accept that it is what it is. And they are who they are. And that might be the hardest moment. When you start to see the people in your family as people, as humans, that have the same insecurities and the same questions and the same wrestlings and all of that you and I do. And in there might be a little grace. In there might be the space to forgive and let go of anger and learn something that you bring into this present moment so that you can do something different in the future. You can learn it. That's the beauty of this. You and I can step out of the shadows when we listen and we locate and we learn. That's the example of Rehoboam. He didn't do it very well, but we can learn a lot from somebody's mistakes. And here's what I want to do before I pray. I want to invite you back next week. It's really important that you come. Because I know that a lot of you have sat through a month of this series, and over again you're going, this sounds really great, but you don't know how broken my family is. You don't know how dark it is, and you don't know how deep it is. I have really good news to share with you next week. You have been invited to a whole new bloodline. And the shadow that's cast by that king, by that dad, is shade. Let's pray. God, thanks that we were able to hear this story. And my hope for me, my hope for my friends is that we would learn to do it different. That we would listen to the past. That we would locate in the future and not, or in the present, and not make our decisions and react constantly from things in the past, and then ultimately learn to do it better down the road. We're grateful for all of the story that got us here. Help us to write the best possible one forward. Thanks for giving us the chance to start again. We love you. Amen.